Afternoon and welcome to A Beer with the Old Growler. I'm the Old Growler, Pete LaFrance, and I'm glad to be with you on this Tuesday, the 2nd of June, 2020. It is day 77, 77th day being they call it pause here in New York, but it's essentially isolation, I guess it's called. I don't know. Anyway, that's the reason we are here. You can find out. I will tell you all about it. On the front page of this program, there is a trailer that explains why we're here. And essentially, it has to do with all the pubs, bars, taverns that have been closed. And so for a journalist that's been covering the hospitality, beer, and spirits industry for 35 or 40 years, it's disconcerting. And for someone who has enjoyed hanging out in pubs, bars, and taverns on a personal level, well, it's been even worse. Most of my friends hang out there, and so I do miss all of them as well. And we've also been going through this pandemic and also through one of the tougher times socially here in the United States. For those of you who are tuning in later, for those of you who are watching this maybe a year from now, it's 2020 right now. It was a difficult time here in the United States. But I tell you what's not a difficult time, and that's right now. It's 5 o'clock, and it's time for a beer with the Old Growler. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get over to the Henry Street Ale House today. They were not open. It will be open tomorrow from 2 until 6 o'clock, only 4 hours. So it'll probably be just the one person, and things are slowly either winding down or getting ready to wind up. According to popular rumor, the 8th, which is next Monday, will be the beginnings of being able to have non-essential workers go back to work and all the rest of it. And on top of that, I believe that the 8th is going to be the last of an 8 o'clock at night to 5 in the morning deadline or lockdown. Or I need a beer. What do we have here? We got a hazy beer, and you know I love hazy beers. Yes, sirree, Bob. And for those of you who have been hanging out, you will know that we've had a beer. The keyboard here, the laptop got thirsty a couple of episodes ago, and so we try and keep our beers farther away. Okay, well, anyways, it's good to have you here. I see I got a couple of folks watching, and if you want to have anything to say, please let me know down there on the bottom. Just to type in something and say hello and good stuff. Anyways, a welcome to A Beer with the Old Growler, and here it is. Oh, even though it's a hazy beer, it's not bad. Sometimes being hazy and overcast isn't too bad. Just like today. A little bit overcast out there. It was a little bit cloudy this morning while walking across the bridge. Mayor, good to see you. Thanks for the thumbs up. I do appreciate it. But walking across the bridge this morning was, as usual, quiet. But even Monica, greetings. Good to see you. Happy to have you with me on. Some people would say it would be a terrible Tuesday, but it wasn't. For me, it was just sitting here. It's one of those great things about being patriotic. And a good citizen is just to sit on my ass and drink beer. So here I am doing just that. Unfortunately, not with as many people as I would like to. Dave, good to see you, my friend. Cheers, and thanks for the thumbs up. That really looks, the people at YouTube, they get all excited about that kind of stuff. Oh, well, as I said, I couldn't get myself a growler, but I did manage to find a couple of Hooties. 6 Point puts them out. They are 6.5% alcohol by volume, 5 international bittering units. We've had these before. Take a look. I'll try and remember to put a link down below. Anyways, today we've got a little fun for the tasting. when I do have to explain, I should explain, particularly to the folks that are just tuning in to the Old Growler, who just stumbled across them. What we've got here is a two-part show. One part of the show, the first part of the show. Well, there's the introduction, of course, but the first part of the show is a beer tasting, and that's where we take a beer, and we've always done so. Not always, but for the last year and a half, we've done tastings at the Henry Street Ale House, which is just across the way, about 3 blocks away over into Brooklyn Heights. And Jerry Scott, the bartender there and manager, has allowed us in on Thursdays. Myself and Jim Bennis and usually some other folks who are there, the regular bar people, and often we get tourists that come in, because back then, well, it is still at the end of the Brooklyn Bridge, but back then there were tourists walking across the Brooklyn Bridge, and all of the social media accoutrement would tell them that that would be the place to get a beer, and that would be when they would drop in. So we usually had at least 1 or 2 other people to do the tastings, and it was called Meeting Expectations. And it simply meant that just like anyone else purchasing a beer, we would look at the beer label, we would read it off, all the information that was on there, and we would see, well, what do we expect? And Jerry would open up the beer, we'd taste it, everybody get a taste and see if it was what we expected. And if it was, we gave it a thumbs up. And if it wasn't, we gave it a thumbs down. And so we'll be doing that with our friend here. This is a gift from Corey Hill at Wet Whistle, where I've been picking up my wine and my spirits recently. But he is also a beer aficionado, and he found this in his cellar. Now, the interesting thing is that for you folks who have been with us, you might notice this label, huh? You've seen it before. Yes, we have. Back in April, yeah, a couple of months ago, we tasted this, and we had some question about what the Russian was on the label there, being it's an English beer. But we're gonna taste this one again, and there is a link in the information box below to that first tasting, so you'll be able to see if it's changed flavor somehow. It is the same year. It's a 1993 Imperial Russian, put out by Courage. And there's quite a when we get to the tasting, there's a little bit of a history that goes along with that particular beer. And the second part of the Old Growler has to do with, well, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I started out as a journalist. I still am a journalist, but I started out as a journalist working in an office. Oh, yes, I worked in an office at one time. And what happened was I ended up covering I started out as a freelance for the beer industry, writing about small breweries, and then got a job at Beverage Media Group and started writing about spirits, wine, and the hospitality industry, bars, pubs, taverns, and that sort of thing. And so I eventually became, as I call it, a professional barfly. And so that's the second part of these presentations, is I will go back in time and remember a particular event or something that happened, or a particular person that moved me along my career as a professional barfly. And no matter where it is or what it is or who it is, I have always been able to come up with something that was very valuable that I got from that experience. And so that's the second part of our presentation. Oh, boy, that's good. Anyways, I've done the introduction part. Yeah, wait a minute. I'm thirsty today for some reason. Be careful, Peter. Don't knock that beer over. Yeah, kept it away. You know, it doesn't look dangerous. You know, when I look at that beer, it looks cloudy, and yeah, and it looks like a beer. I mean, it's got a head on it. comes from a beer can. But if I stop and think about it, look at it, what is it? What is it really? It's a beverage. It's in a glass. It's a cloudy thing. Now, just looking at it, it doesn't look terribly appetizing. I mean, would you drink cloudy water like that? If you'd wonder just what the quality of it happened to be. So appearances can be deceiving, that's for sure. Also, it helps if I was going to hand this to someone who was only used to, mass-produced commercial beers, and said, "Here, try this. This is a great beer." I'm not too sure what their reaction would be. In fact, I am sure what their reaction would be is, "I'm not touching that. That is not beer." Well, it is beer. Just because it doesn't look like beer or like the beer that you drink doesn't mean it's not beer. And then comes, well, if it's in a glass and you've poured it, the object is, for most beverages, is to drink it, to taste it. Well, all right, I'll taste it. Now, when you taste a beer or anything else, it takes a moment to register. It takes a moment for your senses, particularly taste, hello, but there's more than that. It's more than just taste. It is the entire experience of the aromatics, the aromas, but, oh, wait a minute. What do you mean aromas? There's flavor and yet, okay. Even someone who is not a beer connoisseur or anyone takes the sip of this beer and swallows it. Immediately, when that beer is in your mouth, you do not taste anything. It is simply an impression of cold liquid. There's no way you could taste anything because your taste receptors haven't had a chance. Okay, then you open your mouth. Now the air comes in and it allows the flavors to develop. Is this something? Well, this is something that as I mentioned earlier, being a professional barfly, this is something that I've known for years. But it is something that I have to pause every once in a while and call to mind a quote from one of my favorite, I was going to say philosophers, but I guess you could say she's a philosopher. But the writer Anais Nin, who was mainly known for her erotic writings, but she was very observant in people's ability to of course, as a writer, you're aware of how people perceive your work. That's for sure. And you get reaction. You hope you get reaction. Oh, God, that's what writers really need. We just tell me that I'm doing something right, please. You understand what I'm saying, please? All right, well, I digress. In any event, the quote that I'm going to get to is her observation that we do not see the world as it is. We see it as we are. And that answers a lot of questions. It puts things in perspective. However, that's not a particularly, well, in a lockdown, being in quarantine or whatever you want to call it, having a pandemic going on and social unrest, it comes down to observation. And the observation comes down to something very personal. It comes down quite simply to the fact that when we look at things, we do not see what they are. We see them as what we are. And then we have to face what we are. Well, It's kind of like beer. You're not too sure what it is sometimes. It can be elusive. And all of this is because of a contemplation on beer, on a glass of beer. And boy, don't get me started as to figuring out and to starting to talk about how many people it took to make this glass of beer, how much money it took to develop this glass of beer, how much the brewers sweat over this type of beer. And then the marketing and the merchandising, the sales, all of those people involved, the people that make the beer cans, the people that make the labeling, the people that do the graphics. I'm willing to bet that at least 2,000 people were involved in the making of this glass of beer. And all it is a glass of beer. That's it. Water, hops, and grain. That's it.
Oh, Peter, there's yeast.
Well, I doubt there's any yeast in here right now. That's been filtered out. It is part of it, but it is not. It is not part of beer, but it is part of the process of beer. And that is because, again, I'm looking at it from my eyes. And I've just lost practically all of the people that are watching this. But right now, it's time for a tasting. I've pontificated enough. Okay. For my, let's take a look at this. Okay, meeting expectations. What have we got? We have an Imperial Russian Stout, it says. It's got some Russian writing around it. And it says it's brewed in 1993. Brewed for over 200 years by the Courage Limited in Stannis, Middlesex. 170 milliliters, so it's as you can see, it's a teeny tiny bottle. Alcohol, it says 10% by volume. And that's about it. There's not too much. Originally brewed for Catherine II, Empress of all the Russias. Okay. Well, some of us have heard legends about Catherine and her court, etc., etc. But that has nothing to do with the beer in the bottle, does it? No, it doesn't. What it has to do with is it was brewed in 1993, which that's 27 years ago. So for those of you who are less than 27 years old, this was brewed before you were born. All right, what do I expect? Well, I'll cheat. I'm going to take a look and see what they say about it. Got a little cheat sheet here. It says that it's a strong porter called Thrale's Intire, I-N-T-I-R-E, pronounced Intire. Was brewed at Anchor Brewery in Southwark Park, London, near the end of the 18th century. It was exported annually to many places, most notably Russia. Catherine the Great is said to have ordered it in quantity for her court. Eventually, the Anchor Brewery passed from Thrale to Barclay and Perkins, who continued to make Thrale's strong porter, and the recipe continued to evolve and change. Over the time, Thrale's Intire, pronounced Intire, eventually developed into Barclay's Russian Imperial Stout. Russian was kept for marketing reasons. In 1955, Barclay and Perkins merged with their close neighbors, Courage and Company. I believe that's John Courage, but I'm not too sure. And the Russian Imperial Stout continued to be brewed until 1993, and then returned in 2012. So that's the story behind it. Now, I've tasted this before, and I'm not quite too sure what I thought of it then. But what am I expecting now? Well, I'm expecting a dark beer, a relatively, not a viscous beer, not a thick beer, thin-bodied beer, because it is such high alcohol, and yet it'll probably have a rich feel to it. And I'm willing to bet most beers that I have tried that are this old taste like either sherry or port. So let's crack this open at a safe distance.
I heard that cough.
Yes, I know.
Well, why don't you check it out?
No, I'm not. Okay.
Get it away. Away.
Okay, here we go. We're going to crack this open and see what it tastes like. Oh! Okay. Away we go. Now, I'm not expecting any head on this. This is such an old beer. Off with its head, so to speak. Okay. Well, it's dark. That's for damn sure. So it's a stout. It looks like a stout. Now, ha ha ha! But does it feel in the mouth like a stout? Now, a stout is supposed to be, pardon me, I have to refresh my throat. A stout is supposed to be, yeah. Well, the viewer's up to 3 right now, Dave. But thanks for coming back. A stout is supposed to have a rasp to it because of the roasted grain. Now, it's been there a long time. It's been there 27 years, so. Well, it's thin. Very thin body, which is I expected. It's not thick. This was kept, I was assured by Corey, in a essentially a wine cellar, so it was taken care of. But in this case, there is very little left. Even when you wait for the flavor receptors to do something, it's past. It's past. It's gone. It's not with us anymore. Which goes back to, if you take a look at yesterday's Old Growler and breeze through it, you'll see that we were talking about wines, and when wines are meant to be drunk. There are great vintages, and you can get a 30 and a 40-year-old wine that is marvelous. It's developed perfectly. But after a while, they become collectibles. And when they become collectibles, they're not wine anymore. They're a collectible. And I think that this bottle here, it will go up on the wall of beers. Is a collectible. Probably should have been drunk. I was going to say could have been drunk. It should have been savored. Probably about 10 years earlier. 2020 would have been, or 2010 would have been just fine. Well, not there, Peter. So we're gonna, you know something? We're gonna give it an expectation. Yes, it met expectations. It was an old freaking beer, and you couldn't expect it to last without taking some kind of a beating. So that's pretty much where you're at on that one. I give the kids credit for making it, that's for sure. So that's always a. And as I read the history, it was almost like a recording industry. It went from one company to another company to another company, and I'm sure, as in translating literature from Aramaic to Greek to Latin to English to French to German, that you're going to pick up some nuances that weren't meant to be there in the first place. In any event, I am glad I had a chance to try it again, and I am going to go back myself and take a look and see what I thought about the bottle that I had in my collection. All right, Well, for those of you who were with me through the tasting, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for showing up. And I hope all of your beers meet expectations. And for those of you who are still with me, or actually, hey, fellas, before you leave, give me a thumbs up and you know, hit the alarm bell down there, so the alert bell, so that you know when the next Old Growler comes up, because pretty soon, you know, they're gonna let us out, and once they let us out, then I might not be on every day. So don't forget, you know, that's important. And don't forget to subscribe as well. I'd appreciate that. And any comments, please let me know what you think of these presentations. I would really appreciate that as well. All right, now we get to part two. And I hope you all are still hanging out with me. Part two, my life as a professional barfly. And I'm gonna put that right there and get to it. Now, this might be a little long-winded, but it's kind of interesting. Okay. Today I'm going to chit-chat about how the mega breweries come up with new beers. And I'm going to go back again to the 1995, 1992, in that era. So we're going back 20 something years ago. But the big breweries were interested in, they were starting to worry, because the micros, the small breweries, the regional breweries, the Sam Adams, the Harpoons, the Sierra Nevadas, were starting to make inroads. And at the time, I believe it was only like 7% of the beer industry, but they were getting worried, especially Anheuser-Busch. But anyways, in the mid-1990s, there was something that the breweries could do, big breweries, if they were worried. They could either reintroduce an old forgotten brand that they had in their cellar, or they could develop a new specialty beer. Okay. Then this was before buying small breweries. This was before they decided to buy the small breweries. They were going to try to get around some kind of business deal. Okay. Well, the first example I have for you is in 1996. Anheuser-Busch did the latter. They decided to develop a line of specialty beers. And at the time, Michelob was their major specialty beer. That was their premium beer. If you want to drink a Budweiser, you know, you didn't drink a Budweiser, you drank a Michelob. That showed, wow, you know, I'm really up there. And so Budweiser decided that they were going to do that. What they did is they decided to do, as a little research, and mainly as, of course, as an introduction to their operations, they invited, I would say, a dozen maybe of journalists, editors, particularly of the brews papers. I call them brews papers because they were usually monthly magazine type or newspaper type things that people would have, that they would write about beer, specialize about beer. And so these were the people that showed up. And then Anheuser-Busch decided to send us up to see their hop farms on Elk Mountain in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And Coeur d'Alene being a resort area was very nice, of course. And so they gave us a free ride. Now, there was a couple of fellows that were fellow journalists of mine that said that they couldn't do it because they weren't going to take the trip because Budweiser was paying the entire way, and as a journalist, they couldn't. They didn't have the integrity was there. Well, my attitude on this was that if I told my readers that I was on this trip sponsored by AB and was totally open about it, that my journalistic integrity, if it was questioned at all, go ahead, question it. That's fine. So I decided to go on the trip, and I'm glad I did for this particular reason. Yes, they treated us very nicely, no problem. It was a resort, no problem. They took us up to the hop farms. Now, that was fun. It was up near the Canadian border, and we got to see how hops are grown commercially, and to go through the pickers and to see all of the mechanics that were involved. And we had a chance to talk to Augie Bush II, and that was an interesting interview. I was very impressed by the gentleman. His son, Three Sticks, well, there you go. But I was definitely impressed with Augustus Bush II. It was a great interview, and if I had it on tape, that was back when you had tapes. I would have certainly been hoped that I kept it. The key part of this, though, is that they on the last morning there, before departure, they had us come into, it was pretty much a semi-conference hall, not quite a conference room, but not quite a lab, not quite a lecture hall, but a big enough room. And they had samples of beers for us to taste. Now, Anheuser-Busch, the size that they are, could turn out some remarkably various, wonderful beers. And they turned out Bud because that was what sold. And if you are going to sell a beer, that's what you do. Okay. Well, they had us taste a whole series of the different. They had stouts and this and that, and a pale ale, a Kolsch, a whole bunch of a wee heavy. It was just amazing as to what they could do. And they started out at the very light end, and we worked our way all the way up to the stouts. And they had us, what did you think of it? It was a real, panel type thing, of course. So they picked our brains. Okay, about 4 months later, son of a gun, they came out with the Michelob specialty line of beers. Oh, yes. Now, this was the second one. This was the amber lager. We didn't vote for the amber lager. We voted for the brown ale. And they did. That was the first one they came out with. And so Anheuser-Busch, they ran with it for a while, but then the small breweries, it became obvious that no matter how premium this looks, it's not coming from a microbrewery. And later on, they changed their techniques and they started buying up breweries. And so at least they were able to, they tried to come up with a new beer with something to compete. Well, the other story that comes down is that at the time Diageo owned Guinness, and Guinness owned a brewery in Canada called Moosehead. Now, Moosehead was in a green bottle. It had a moose on the neck of the neck label of the thing, and a moose on the main part. And, it wasn't as skunky as Heineken because it came from Canada and it was close enough so that it didn't have to travel too far. But it wasn't doing terribly well. So they had us come up to St. John, New Brunswick, and visit the Oland family who owned Moosehead. So we went up and we had, again, it was a nice little weekend. In St. John, is back then, and we were talking 1997, 98. Well, it's a small city. I mean, I come from Brooklyn, here in Brooklyn, New York, the 5th largest city in the United States, and on its own. And so I was not accustomed to smaller venues for entertainment. And they had what they call a disco, which meant there was a ball that had the mirrors on it, and they played loud music. And there was about 12 of us journalists, and we were there tasting Moosehead beer. And I was dressed pretty much as I do now, except that I had a trench coat on, a red tie, white shirt. I just knocked my microphone off. White shirt, fedora, and plain-toed black shoes. And so I'm standing there drinking some beer, talking to a fellow by the name of Bill Owens and another journalist. And one of these young people come up to me, and I don't know why, but she comes up to me and I'm drinking the Moosehead. She says, "Are you with Moosehead people?" I said, "Well, I'm drinking Moosehead." And she says, "You look like you're RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police." Well, thank you very much. That's a blow my cover. But they took us again And to the Olin family took us up to their house, and there was a little cottage there, and they showed us what they were going to ask, what we thought they should do. And we said, well, first of all, put it in a brown bottle, because that's more traditional. Second of all, the story that you've told us is that your great grandmother was the one that started this. And now women and beer, it's always been that way. So why don't you go for a colonial look, an old styled Canadian colonial look? Have a woman, with the homestead, and do the whole thing. And you've already said that you're planning on going at least organic on some of your produce. Well, why don't you do that? And so what happened was we came up with a pretty good design, a pretty good idea for them, and they thanked us very much and sent us home with a lot of swag, which was just fine. So we didn't have to write anything this time. This was just, they were just picking our brains. Well, about 3 months later, Moosehead came out with a new campaign. And the new campaign, quite simply, was that they edged their labels, their regular labels, with a little silver, and they put a new cap on there with a little, I think it was a puzzle on the inside or something. So they didn't listen. And so that's an example of how two major breweries or two major corporations operate. And some of them listen and some of them don't. And that was an experience of learning about how they cannot turn on a dime. It takes a lot of time for them to be able to formulate things. And business and the business of beer came very, very obvious to me on that. I mean, there is a love of beer, which I do, but the business of beer and finding out about it was quite an eye-opener. And particularly the fact that Anheuser-Busch, a large corporation like that, could turn out any kind of beer they wanted. And we asked them about that, and they said, yes, there was a wholesaler in Oregon that was asking for a particular type of beer, and Anheuser-Busch, they said, well, can you sell 1 million cases of it in a year? And they said, no shit, George. So they said, well, we'll come up with a beer for you. You come up here, you tell us what you want. We'll put it in a can and a bottle and a keg. We give you a label, and off you go. And that's the business of beer. Oh, there's a lot of love that goes on, and there's a lot of craft out there, yeah. But that's the business of beer. Well, I've lasted a little bit longer than my time. I've got down almost 38 minutes this time. And I don't know whether I'm trying to accomplish anything or not as far as meeting the clock line, but I certainly hope that you've all been entertained by watching this. And I hope that you come back tomorrow or the next time. As I say, we're getting towards the 8th of June. This is the 2nd of June, and we're going through some tough times here. For those of you who are watching later on in the years, check us out in I was going to say the history books, but Google us up and you'll see. Well, I hope everybody has a better day tomorrow than you did today, or if you had a good day today, I hope you had a good day tomorrow as well. This is the Old Growler. Hoping to see you next time. Enjoy.